You probably have to be my age, but there was a was both play and a movie that came out years ago called The King and I. And it's about the king of Siam, and he was definitely the king. And so in his kingdom of Siam, nobody's head could be above his. His head always to be the tallest one in the room. So he'd hired a British teacher to come over to Siam and to teach the royal children. There's a great scene where the two of them are together, and he would lower his head, so she'd have to lower it. Then he lowered it a little more, and she'd have to lower it. Finally, he was almost at the floor, and her head was resting on the ground. She was a loyal subject, and that's kind of the reverence that he wanted from his subjects. It was cute, but we got his point too. I was thinking because our King Jesus is exactly the polar opposite of that. He says, I am meek and humble of heart. Scripture says to him in Philippians, although he was God, he didn't cling to God, but he became a man. And going even lower, he became a slave. And going even lower, he died the death of a criminal on the cross. The ultimate in downward mobility. So when Jesus says, I am meek and humble of heart, that's not just words. He backs up his words with his life, with his actions. He knows us well, so he says to us, come to me, all you who labor and are burdened. Who of us is not burdened? There's economic worries about our finances, fear of death, fear of dying, burden of our own sinfulness that we struggle with, family troubles, violence in our world. Takes a brave man to watch the news, right? Violence in the world. Trying to live a life without God or without faith. Talk about a burden that a poor person would have to struggle with. Death of a loved one. All of us carry burdens of one kind or another. And Jesus invites us to bring those burdens over to him, to turn them over to his hands. He invites us, if you will, to trade yokes, to give all those yokes to him, and in place, he's going to give us his yoke. He says, take my yoke upon you and learn from me. Our non-God yokes can be terrible tyrants over us. If love of money is my yoke, as I age, I will get lonelier and lonelier. There's a reason we all love Ebenezer Scrooge at Christmas so much. He is a walking sermon for the loneliness of a person who makes money their whole focus. If lust is my yoke, I'm going to remain immature my whole life long. Some people believe in what they call serial monogamy. In other words, I only marry one person at a time, but it's in a series. You're number 3 in the series. You're number 5 in the series. In other words, I never stay with anybody long enough to do that death to self that we all have to do as we mature, as we grow older. If popularity is my yoke, it's one of the worst. I will be a slave to people who threaten to withdraw their friendship from me. If you do that, I'm not going to be your friend. Oh, okay, I won't do it. I'll be their slave. If that's my goal, human respect, popularity. There's a wonderful song, I love it, I think I told you about it. Bob Dylan kind of lived quite a life, did it all, but he had a conversion, a serious religious conversion, and out of his conversion, the first song that he sang was, you got to serve somebody. And I can remember the gravelly voice, you got to serve somebody. You knew it was Bob Dylan. But of course he's right. He's right. We, all of us, you, me, all of us have to serve somebody. He's absolutely right. Any other yoke except Jesus Christ will exact a terrible toll on our life. But to serve and obey Jesus and to take up his yoke, his will for my life, turns out to be what they call a glorious servitude. I'm a servant and I love it. Why? Because the one I'm serving is Jesus Christ. We know who we are and where we're going. His yoke on our shoulders makes all those other yokes light. I don't think they really go away, but it makes them light. takes away their power over me. I love that saying in the book of Joshua where Joshua says, "Serve whom you will, but as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." Once we make that decision to serve the Lord our God, our life changes. It's true that it is a yoke, the yoke of Christ. I would think of it like a good marriage. Call that a sweet yoke. Not so much a restriction, although there are restrictions. There are restrictions in a good marriage. There are restrictions in following Christ. But we experience Christ's yoke as a fulfillment, as a freedom, rather than an imposition. Our life becomes lighter, more direct. We know what to do and what not to do, unburdened. We're no longer a captive to any of those tyrant yokes. There's no doubt there are times when the grass looks greener for all of us, when other people's lives look lots better than ours. And that's a good time to remember that in Jesus' time, and still today, the yoke for the oxen were hand-carved and individualized. Some oxen have big shoulders, some more modest shoulders, some have longer necks, shorter necks. Every yoke was hand-carved wooden just for that one oxen. So each oxen could do the best job pulling that plow possible because the yoke was precisely for them. You see where we're going? It's the same way with us. I love that little story. We've all heard it about the man who didn't like his cross, so he's going to trade it in. Remember? So he went into this room full of crosses, and he grabbed one. Walking out the door, he goes, "Oh, that's my cross. I chose my own cross." Because our cross is a cross, but God knows exactly the way to get us to heaven. And our cross is exactly the cross that we personally, individually need in order to get to heaven. We believe that God gives each of us what we call the grace of state. I love this, and I believe in it. I see it more and more with each passing year. The grace of state means the grace that we exactly need for our state in life. As a student, the grace we need to be a good student. As a son, as a daughter, as a husband, as a wife, as a mother, a father, a priest, a nun, a follower of Jesus Christ. The grace to carry the crosses that are ours. I'm thinking about it a lot this week. I could tell you a million stories. I am privileged to see on, I would say, a weekly basis, families losing loved ones, moms and dads comforting their children, siblings bonding together at the death of a parent or a grandparent or a friend. And at those times, I can almost see God's grace working in them, giving them the right words, the courage, the strength that they need. And I stand in awe. I can see God right there on the other half of that yoke, because the oxen always traveled in pairs. So this oxen had a personally carved yoke, but the wood went all the way across. And there's another oxen working the fields with him. And of course, that other oxen with us is Jesus Christ. And we're not carrying that load alone ever. Jesus' prayer in his agony in the garden, we believe, is a perfect prayer. "Not my will, but yours be done, Father." And he took the yoke of obedience, of following God's will, and he put it squarely on his shoulders. So may it be with us every day. From our morning offering on, I accept your yoke on my shoulders, Lord God. Help me to obey you, to surrender my life to you. I love that prayer of St. Ignatius Loyola, the Suscipe. I think I've shared it with you before, but it's perfect when we're talking about the yoke of Jesus Christ. He says, "Take, Lord, receive all my liberty, my memory, my understanding, my entire will. Give me only your love and your grace, and that is enough for me."